Supreme Court will hear yet another abortion case on Wednesday, the second in a month, this time examining whether Idaho's near total ban steps on the federal law that protects patients who need emergency care. The ruling in this case would determine access to abortions in emergency rooms across the country, not just Idaho. Meanwhile, former Vice President Mike Pence called out ex-President Donald Trump for betraying the pro-life movement. In an op-ed in the New York Times, Pence touted serving in what he calls the most pro-life administration in the history of the United States. But he continues on with lambasting Trump for abandoning the movement, writing, quote, "I was deeply disappointed when Mr. Trump stated that he considered abortion to be a states-only issue and would not sign a bill prohibiting late-term abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, even if it came to his desk."
Meanwhile, the Washington Post is going after Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for having what they describe as an ambiguous position on abortion. According to the Post, while Kennedy believes that the decision to have an abortion should be made between a woman and her doctor, he avoids talking about the issue. The Post knocked RFK Jr. for mentioning vaccines frequently and abortion hardly at all. When pressed on this subject, an RFK Jr. campaign spokesperson said RFK Jr. does not want to add fuel to the fire. Full quote being, "These issues also have the potential to unify the country." There, the spokesperson talking about issues like vaccine mandates, unlike abortion, which is fundamentally divisive. So Mr. Kennedy makes his position plain, but does not dwell on the subject.
Abortion and access to it stands in the top as the top issue for 1 in 8 voters, say polls. So this is one of those issues, I was looking at some of the polling analysis on this, where people won't necessarily rank it as their top issue, but if you reframe the question and ask them, what are the issues that could cause you to change your vote, either from not voting to voting or from one candidate to the other, abortion ranks high among those. So if you ask people what's the most important thing in your life, most people at any given moment are considering abortion, but they do think it's a fundamental issue for them. That being said, this Idaho case is really interesting. The basis of it is that there is a federal law that says if you go to a hospital in an emergency condition, they have to treat you, right? This is basically our substitute for having any kind of universal health care in this country is to have a social safety net. So you don't have people dying in the streets with emerging conditions. They have to treat you in the hospital. They may charge you up the wazoo afterward, but at least they'll save your life. And that is in tension with an Idaho law that does not have an exception for emergency care that would address the health of the mother only if her life is literally at risk. And so if a pregnant woman goes into a hospital and might have to have an organ removed, be compromised in terms of being able to ever have a child again, anything short of literally saving her life, the hospitals in Idaho, it pertains to any hospital that receives Medicare or Medicaid, so that's basically every hospital, are now conflicted saying, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to fulfill my duties under this federal law and keep this person and give this person their necessary care, or am I going to get dinged by the state law and penalized, criminalized for doing my job?
It'll be interesting to see how they work that out. It's clear that, Mike Pence is trying to, drag Trump for articulating a stance that makes Trump more popular, or the position Trump holds. He is more moderate on this issue than many others in the party, and it's clear that abortion has hurt the party in the past. I think even many pro-life conservative media figures recognize that, don't raise the prospect of a national ban. Stop talking about it. The point of Roe v. Wade being overturned was to turn it back to the states. So if you happen to have states where you have very conservative enough populations to put in place stricter abortion laws, then that's fine. That hasn't actually materialized yet, but in theory you could have it. Don't talk about a national abortion ban. That's unpopular, and that's a reason for people to mobilize and go to the polls to vote against Republicans.
Now, some people saw the Mike Pence op-ed as a sort of a kind of a media trick. Basically, Mike Pence getting out in front of a liberal audience and saying, look how much more conservative I am than Donald Trump. This makes Donald Trump look less scary, and basically setting Donald Trump up to look like the relative good guy. Obviously, Mike Pence isn't in the mix anymore. He can kind of fall on the proverbial sword if it makes Donald Trump look comparatively more moderate. That's a lot of three-dimensional chess. I'm not sure.
I think Mike Pence just really cares about does not like abortion and wants it to be banned, and that is his sincere motivation for writing the op-ed.
I think both things can be true, but I also do think Donald Trump, again, is benefiting from a lot of the ambiguity about what his position actually is on issues like an abortion ban, and maybe Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is in a similar position. Now, the insinuations in this most recent piece about
Yeah.
him, I do think go pretty far. But do remember that in the context of speaking to Ali Velshi in NBC at the end of last year, he did find himself in a situation where he seemed to pretty explicitly say that he would support a national abortion ban.
At 15
and
weeks.
then he had to, at 15 weeks, but
Yeah.
still a national abortion ban at 15 weeks, that's the issue we're dealing with in Idaho. That there are things that can happen after 15 weeks that imperil the life and safety of a mother. And if you have a national abortion ban, you're sentencing those women to die or to have hysterectomies or
Well, did he say 15 weeks with no exceptions after 15 weeks?
well, that is
yeah.
the issue. That is the ambiguity that we're talking about. So he ended up having to walk that statement back after, of course, the media reported about how incredible it was that a recent, I can't remember if he was still running as a Democrat or not at that point, but someone who had at least recently been a Democratic candidate for president would endorse an abortion ban at any stage, given the Democratic Party's position that these kind of very serious medical interventions need to be decided between a patient and a doctor, not big government.
Yeah, the thrust, though, of this Washington Post article is that it's a textbook. I'm a journalist. Let me find some reason to complain about. I wish he would talk about it. Like it's the article says, oh, but he's tweeted about vaccines, 64 times and not abortion once. It's very like. He's not talking about the thing I want him to talk about, because obviously the journalist doesn't agree with him on vaccines or vaccine mandates and wants him to concentrate more on that. I think his spokesperson is essentially saying in this is that, well, yes, we're leaving it. It's not actually ambiguous. He supports abortion rights, despite what he said that one time, that he thinks that the quote in here is that decision should be left to a woman and her doctors. He actually does support it, but he is frankly courting some conservative voters that he's trying to win to his side, and he benefits from not saying all that much about abortion or not talking about it constantly, which is a perfectly valid campaign strategy given the position he's in as someone who is trying to appeal to voters on many different sides of the political spectrum.
But I don't know about that, because as I said up top, abortion is one of those issues that frankly isn't as polarizing, isn't as partisan as many people like to paint it as, especially post-Dobbs. Increasingly, people are realizing that they have a bedrock foundational belief that these rights need to be preserved and not obstructed on a state-by-state basis. And you're seeing people like Carrie Lake run, fleeing, screaming and kicking from their prior abortion positions when they see that the obvious effect of supporting a ruling like Dobbs was that you have, in the case of Carrie Lake, this 1860-ish era law that was put into effect when Abraham Lincoln was president, coming into effect very predictably so, which again creates a constructive abortion ban in her state. So now everyone is having to flip-flop, and this is the question before the American people. People like Carrie Lake who are flipping their positions, people like Donald Trump who are ambiguous about their positions. What are they actually going to do? How much can you trust them? RFK Jr. as well. How much can you trust them to actually protect this right if they are willing to play in the ambiguity and cater to a minority audience view? Wait, can cater to a minority of the audience, the minority of the voting public who actually do support an abortion ban that would imperil the lives of mothers across the country.
It depends what kind of ban you're talking about. Again, 15 weeks plus exceptions for health, safety of the mother gets about half the support in polls, even according to the most recent polls. So it's not like, yes, you're right that the majority of the country, a strong majority, does not want to make abortion totally illegal. I agree with that, and does not think there should be a policy at the federal level. But it's a little bit, it's more confusing and complicated than that. Again, 15 weeks plus exceptions is the policy in France and many other European countries.
But you keep shoehorning in health and safety of the mother. The reason that we're talking about this Idaho case that's coming before the Supreme Court is because these exceptions either
I don't disagree with that. I was talking about why a candidate might.
But that's the problem
say
with this state-by-state approach. You say state-by-state, but states are not including these exceptions. And there are people, women, real people who live in these states that thought they were safe voting for Donald Trump, think that they might be safe voting for RFK Jr., but don't have assurances that they are actually going to protect their interests against an authoritarian state who wants to come between them and their health care. And that's why you're seeing Joe Biden, I think smartly, frankly, really leaning into the abortion.
Well, you're right. We should not confuse people. If your position is
he is by a ratio of something like 9-to-1, emphasizing abortion in the latest slate of ads that he's been putting out there. We played a week or two ago a really compelling ad that Joe Biden put out about a woman who very directly was put in a position where she might not be able to have children in the future because the hospital that she went to in the state of Texas, I believe, was unsure about what kind of care they could give her because of things happening at the federal level, because of Dobbs, because of the conflict between various federal protections and what states' rights are allowed to do.
Yes, there should be no ambiguity about the fact that if your position is you support abortion in any and all circumstances and you think there should be no limits on it, there is one candidate for you, and that candidate is Joe Biden. Donald Trump and RFK Jr. are trying to cater to or potentially win voters who have a more nuanced or more themselves ambiguous view on the issue.
They're trying to cater to people who have a restrictive view on abortion, who they want to keep the door open. Look, if they wanted someone who was, I don't know, I'm okay with abortion, then they would be on board with the status quo. You're only trying to not say that you would protect people's abortion rights if you want to cater to an audience that doesn't want you to protect people's abortion rights. So we don't have to engage with ambiguity just because they're engaging in ambiguity to create a political gray zone.
But it is a gray zone for a lot of voters. It's not a...
No. The law is not a gray zone, and they are endorsing changes to the law that would very clearly, not ambiguous.
Most people think abortion should be legal in some circumstances and illegal in others.
Ban your right to have an abortion, and that's why the Supreme Court is just looking at this case in Idaho. That's why Carrie Lake had to run humiliatingly, screaming from her clearly documented position supporting the 19th century law that was on the books in Arizona, because Republicans know they're cooked on this. That's why everyone's trying to hide the ball. And the question is, are voters going to appreciate the fact that, frankly, they're being misled because people want to win? And do they have confidence in what their candidates are going to do when they get into office if they're willing to be so wishy-washy during campaign season?
All right, more Rising right after this.